Ladies and gentlemen, but probably mostly gentlemen, thanks for tuning in today. I'm John Holmes of Holmes Hobbies, and we're going to talk about rebuilding brushless motors. Today's topic is rebuilding your brushless motor. Here I have a Holmes Hobbies Puller Pro Stubby 540, and every motor is really going to take apart in a different way, but I'm going to show you this one. You may need a set of Allen wrenches to take your motor apart. You may need a #1 Phillips head screwdriver to take it apart, so you will need to know what tools that you need before you do it, of course. Now, not shown is going to be a toothbrush or soft brush with some water with a little bit of dish soap put into it, just in case it was dirty and we needed to clean out some dirt. That's how we're going to get it out. So that's pretty much the only thing that you need to do a rebuild on a brushless motor. It's very simple, so let's get started. Get the longest screwdriver that you can possibly find to make it difficult first. This particular motor had 3 Phillips head screws in the back of the end bell. That is the easiest way to disassemble, and you can take my word for it because this is my motor. So we take those screws out, we pop the end bell off the back. Sometimes they're going to be really stuck. When they are really stuck and you can't get the end bell off, sometimes you can just press on that front shaft, boop, and it'll pop it right out, and usually make that little noise too, boop. So what we're going to look for when we're rebuilding a motor is basically crud inside. Your sensor board may be acting erratic and you want to take it apart and inspect it to see why. This one's waterproofed and clean, but what you would look at is the contacts. So we've got the plug on the front side here, and you would look at the contacts on the back side to see if there's any corrosion in between them. If there is, you can take that soft brush, clean off the corrosion, probably put something like a conformal coating back on it so it won't get corroded again, and then reassemble. On this particular one, you can see that there are 2 Phillips head screws that would remove the sensor board from our rear plate. I do not need to take that off at the time, so I'm not going to, but that may be part of your rebuild. Next, what we would do if we are cleaning out the motor, let's say you got into some mud and some mud got inside, we would take the rotor out, and you want to make sure that you keep track of the spacers exactly as they sit and any pieces like rubber grommets or anything like that. So we're going to take the backside spacers off, be sure that we know exactly where they go so that when we reassemble the motor that it reassembles easy. Now, sometimes you can just, grab this with a set of soft jaw pliers, maybe wrap some rubber or some, shirt material around the plier jaw so you don't mar the shaft. What I like to do is get a screwdriver and essentially push the shaft all the way through the motor to eject the rotor, like so. Of course, you don't want to do that over a hard floor because it'll fall out. What you can do is place your hand behind it so when you push it out, you get to grab the rotor. So the rotor came out like this. This particular motor did not have shims on the front. Most of them are going to have shims on both sides of that rotor. So be sure you know where they go so that when you reassemble it, you will have exactly the same shimming as when you started. Very important to reshim it the same way. So the next thing to do would be to take off on this particular motor the faceplate where the bearings are if I needed to replace the bearings or the faceplate. I don't need to do that at this time, so there's no reason for me to take it apart. This would be the time that we would take a soft brush, just pretend this is a soft brush. We would clean off any mud and debris on the rotor. We would make sure that we cleaned any off on the other parts. Again, if I had mud inside, I would probably take this faceplate off. I would clean out the bearing using soapy water and a soft brush. Then what I would need to do is make sure that everything is dry before I reassemble it. So if you don't have an air hose to blast the water off of it, you just want to sit it out for a day before you reassemble it. Otherwise, you can use some WD-40, but you have to be sure that you always re-lube the bearings before you go back for the reinstall. So in this case, standard bearings, what I would use is just a 0 weight motor oil. So you can go to Walmart and pick up some 0W5 or whatever, 0W10, 0W20. Just make sure you get a 0 weight oil for the bearing, and you really only need 1 drop, 1 very small drop, maybe 2 very small drops at the most to re-lube the bearing. If your bearings are crunchy, then this will be the time when you want to replace them. If you don't have a bearing press, it's going to be kind of difficult to do that. So what we do is we actually sell the face plate and the rear plate with bearings already installed, because it's honestly a really tight press fit, and unless you do essentially throwing the bearings in the freezer, throwing the face plate into an oven and get them in opposite temperatures, you can slap them together a little bit easier, and then when they come to temperature, it's a very tight fit. Without that tight fit, you're going to have some bearing problems, thus why we have such a tight tolerance on that. And also thus why we sell the faceplate with the bearing already installed and the rear plate with the bearing already installed, because it's just a lot easier if you don't have to worry about damaging your bearing during the install. We can do that for you, and we sell them for the same price as a bearing by itself, so it ends up to be a good deal for everybody all the way around. Now we want to reinstall the rotor. We've already cleaned everything. Let's pretend in this case we want to reinstall the rotor first. Make sure that your shims are where they were when you put it back together. I know this shim's going to fly off, so I'm going to install that after I put the rotor in. You want to be very careful reinstalling the rotor. You got to get the shaft through the face bearing, and it's going to want to suck into it, so you may want to use the pliers with something protecting the jaws, you know, make it soft jaws. So this one has an 1/8 inch step down on the shaft and a 5mm main shaft where it interfaces with the bearing. So we just need to kind of push that through, wiggle it around a little bit, be very gentle. Don't just force it, don't just slam it down on the table. We just have to be very gentle, and it will pop through when it feels like it. There we go, pop through. Now we reinstall the shims in the exact order that it was. Then we reinstall this little rubber grommet, or whatever you want to call that. It keeps water and debris out of the motor, whatever you want to call that rubber guy. And then we reinstall the back plate, which on this particular design is including the sensor board. At that point, when it is back together, also being very gentle, don't just jam it all together, we would reinstall our 3 Phillips head screws on this particular motor. 1, 2, 3, and the motor should be good to go at this point. I would also check and make sure your shimming is still proper, that it's not just totally jammed up. If you have a wavy washer on the inside, you won't feel any looseness, hopefully, at least in there. I know Castle Motors use a wavy washer on all of our newest puller motors. We use a wavy washer, and also with the Trailmaster motors we use them, and it just keeps the bearings tight and make sure that it's the lowest noise motor that you can get, really. So that's pretty much it. It's very straightforward. You take it apart, you clean it up, you put it back together. There's really not much more to a brushless motor. And the only wear items on a brushless motor are the bearings themselves. So worst case scenario, you have to replace the bearings. Maybe you got into water and your sensor board went out, so maybe you need to replace that. But besides that, as long as you don't let them sit and rust up, there is nothing that will go bad on these long term, short of, you know, overheating them or something like that. Occasionally, yeah, a sensor board may go out just from bad luck. They are components, so they will fail. You can always test that out by unplugging the sensor wire and running it sensorless to make sure your motor still works and you don't have shorts between the phase or something like that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Very straightforward. Take it apart, put it back together, make sure that it's clean, make sure that there's no moisture when you put it back together, and re-lube the bearings with a drop, maybe 2 of zero weight motor oil. And that's really it. You're good to go. So if you have any more questions about a rebuild or specific questions about a particular motor, maybe I have some experience with it, you can post those down in the comments below. Otherwise, if you want help with a motor rebuild and you don't want to do it yourself, you can always send them in to us and we will do it for you, and we will source the parts to get the rebuild done if we need to. So thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed it and got some information on how to rebuild your brushless motor. Have a good one.